Witch Hunt. The winter of 1692 started out like any other winter in Salem Village, Massachusetts. It was cold and it was dark. The roads were often covered by deep drifts of snow. Visitors were rare, but those passing through could always warm themselves at parsonage. Samuel Parris, the minister of the village church, lived there with his wife Elizabeth, his daughter Betty, his niece Abigail, and two slaves, John and Tituba. It was the minister's duty to take care of the people. Every Sunday, Mr. Parris preached in church for 2 or 3 hours. The villagers, he warned, must be constantly on guard. The devil and his tricks were everywhere. The Parsis and Puritans, like almost everyone in Salem Village, Puritans wore plain clothes and had strict customs. Their children were not allowed to dance or play music. The Puritans believed that children should be seen and not heard. So it was surprising that on January 20th, the minister's daughter Betty did something that Puritan children were not allowed to do. She screamed. The rest of the family rushed to see what was wrong. Had she fallen? Was there a wild animal in the house? Betty did not seem hurt, or she did not seem scared, yet she answered everyone's question with choking sounds and hoarse cries. This was strange. On the following days, she crawled into holes and screamed under chairs, refusing to come out. Mr. Parris was puzzled. 9-year-old Betty had never done anything like this before. She was sensitive and shy, but so were many children, and they did not go around screaming for no reason. During the next week, the minister's 11-year-old niece, Abigail, began acting the same way. Now both girls were crying out and knocking over furniture. Soon 8 other girls in the village were doing these things too. Some of them fell to the floor during meals. Others interrupted church services and public meetings. Their piercing shrieks said strange words. The girls were not punished. Their parents did not think the girls did these things on purpose, but nobody knew who or what was responsible. In early February, Mr. Parris asked the villager doctors for help. The doctor examined Betty and the other girls carefully. He could not find anything wrong. He knew how to cure a sprained ankle covered with hot beer and honey, and he knew how to cure falling sickness. Eat a powder made from frog liver 10 times a day. But he did not know how to cure the strange madness. The doctor, however, had another explanation. The girls were bewitched. Mr. Parris agreed with the doctor. Like most Puritans, he believed in witches. They were often blamed for crop failure or unexplained illnesses. Perhaps witches were tormenting the girls. This was a very serious matter, and it was the minister's duty to get to the bottom of it. So Mr. Parris told Betty and Abigail and the 8 other girls to meet in his home. He also invited 2 ministers from nearby towns. Witchcraft was coming that concerned them all. The 10 girls stood nervously before the 3 ministers. They were not used to talking to such important men. Important men had never paid this kind of attention to them before. After everyone prayed for guidance, the room became quiet. The 2 visiting ministers were not sure they believed the stories were hearing. They stared at the girls, waiting to see what would happen. Suddenly, one of the girls groaned. Another gasped and fell like a stone. The other girls threw themselves around the room, knocking over chairs and crashing into walls. The 2 visiting ministers watched the girls closely. Their eyes widened, their mouths fell open. No one could pretend to have such fits. So the stories were true. In Salem Village, witches were at work. The news passed quickly through Salem Village. The blacksmith heard it while he was repairing a slave runner. He told a farmer who had brought in his horse to be reshod. The farmer told his wife when he got home, and she shared the news with her friends at church on Sunday. Salem Village was a small community of about 500 people. Everyone there knew everyone else, so to think that witches lived secretly among them was terrifying. Almost everyone believed in witches. Witches had great power given to them by the devil. Witches could cast spells and ride broomsticks through the air. They could make people fall in love, and travelers lose their way in the woods. They could send out ghostly images of themselves too. These ghostly images, or specters, were invisible to most people. The girls, it seemed, could see them in the middle of the fits. They cried out. The specters were pinching them and poking them. At one church meeting, Abigail came to see a woman spectre sitting on the beam overhead, sucking on a yellow bird. Moments later, the sheriff's daughter, Anne Putnam, cried out that a yellow bird was sitting in the minister's hat. Such outbursts both frightened and fascinated people. They could not help being curious about the girls, and so far the curiosity had not gotten anyone into trouble. But that was about to change. Until now, the girls had named no one, but the minister was stern with them. It was not enough to know that the girls were bewitched. He demanded to know who had bewitching them. Who was bewitching them? At first, the girls would not talk. Some of the villagers tried to help. If the girls would not name any witches on their own, perhaps they would take suggestions. One farmer mentioned a woman who had stared at his cow in the morning. That afternoon, the cow had gotten sick. She must be a witch. Somebody else knew a woman who went out for walks after dark. Only a witch would do that. The girls heard many stories like these, and still they named no one. But the pressure on them was mounting. If the girls could see specters, they should be able to identify them. Finally, on February 29th, the girls named 3 women: Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and Paris's slave Tituba. These 3 were immediately arrested. The next day, a large crowd gathered at the meeting house. The people who arrived early got seats inside. Others stood in the streets. Everyone had come to see the magistrates talk to the accused woman. The magistrates were the town leaders. It was their job to decide if the woman should be tried as witches in court. Betty and the other girls were there as witnesses. They sat to one side there, where they could see everything, and where the magistrates could question them when necessary. The 3 women were brought out one at a time. Sarah Good was a grumpy and unpopular person who sometimes went from door to door, banging for good food for her children. Sarah Osborne was an old, sickly woman. People were gossiping about her because she had married one of her servants. Tituba stood out among the Puritans because she had been born and raised on the island far away Caribbean Sea. The Sarah Glenn and Sarah Osborne were brought before the magistrates. The girls instantly fell to the ground. They twitched and twisted in pain. They screamed that the specters of both women were pinching and biting them. The magistrates asked each woman if she could prove her innocence, but the girls were so clearly suffering. Neither of them could, but they both claimed to be innocent anyway. The magistrates were not swayed. They ordered the woman held for trial in the nearby town of Salem. The talk with Tituba went differently. Like the girls, she was not used to having important people listening to what she had to say. She seemed confused. At first, she denied being a witch, but since she couldn't confess, She said that she used magic. She added that she had seen a man and 4 women, including Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne, holding the girls at different times. She even said she had once ridden a broomstick with Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne behind her. The magistrates considered Cuba as guilty as the others. Because she has confessed, her fate was different. As long as she was willing to help the magistrates find out their witches, they could keep her in the Salem Village jail. Now the magistrates were sure there were other witches. Their work had just begun. As the days and weeks went by, the girls named many other men and women. The magistrates sent dozens of people to jail. Not everyone agreed with the magistrates. A few people had doubts. They thought the girls should just be ignored. They said the girls were young and likely to be imagining things. 2 women who felt this way soon found themselves accused of witchcraft. No wonder they said they doubt us, said the girls. They are witches themselves. Before long, the girls were accusing other doubters as well. The magistrates followed up every lead, and one by one, these doubters were sent to jail to await their trials. While the villagers were busy guessing who would be next, one of the girls, Mary Warren, made a surprising declaration. Not everything was as it seemed. Mary said that the other girls did but December. Not everything was as it seemed. Mary said the other girls did but December. In other words, they were faking their fits. Mary said no more, but she knew the real story. Before the witch hunt had started, she and other girls had been meeting regularly with Cuba in Betty's house. They thought Cuba was very talented. She could read palms and tell fortunes. She knew strange and wonderful stories of life in the Caribbean. The girls had greatly enjoyed such talks, especially in the winter when the cold gray days seemed so dark. But they knew their parents would not approve. Telling fortunes was not just a silly game to the Puritans, it was a sin. The girls would have been punished for doing these things. Knowing this, they had kept the meeting a secret. This secret must be hard for Betty Paris to keep. She was the youngest. The pressure to tell her may have burned up inside her until she was found a way out. Perhaps that was why she screamed. When the girls found that Betty was acting strangely, they worried and she might tell her secret. They decided to take the attention away from Betty by imitating her. It was going to be like a game. Of course, now it was more than a game. Some of the girls half believed their own stories about specters and witches. For them, the line between truth and make-believe had already disappeared. Mary Warren thought they had gone too far. But the others were not about to stop. They were afraid that Mary would tell about the secret meetings. They had to deal with her before she said any more, so they accused her of joining with the devil. The devil did not like to see so many witches named. They said Mary was trying to make the girls look bad so that no one would believe them. And if no one believed them, the witches could go on making trouble. Mary protested, but it did no good. She was brought before the magistrates too, and the magistrates questioned whether the other girls had fits. Mary was doing this to them. They cried out. Mary herself was not sure what to think. She found a fit and was taken away into jail. The next day, Mary changed her mind. She did not want to spend any more time in jail. Now she said the girls were telling the truth. The girls then agreed with Mary and had not become a servant of the devil after all. She had broken away from him just in time. Mary was soon released from jail. She never spoke about dissembling again. The girls felt better. Their secret was safe. As spring came to Massachusetts, the snow melted and the birds returned. By May, the muddy roads were dry and the trees were budding. It was not a happy spring though, for the almost 100 people accused of witchcraft. They were still awaiting for a trial and the chance to prove their innocence. Puritans were brought to trial for many different offenses. Some were arrested for kissing in public. Others were fined for wearing the wrong kind of boots or falling asleep in church. Most serious crimes resulted in whippings or long jail terms. Witchcraft, like murder, were punishable by death. 3 women has been hanged for practicing witchcraft in the 70 years since the Pilgrims had come to America. Dozens more of England had been hanged up and burned at the stakes. The Salem trials began in late May and ran into the fall. Each day, the 7 judges sat solemnly in their chairs at the front of the courthouse. The jury of men sat to one side. They were not the only ones in Salem courthouse. The courtroom was filled with villagers. Farmers neglected their fields. Blacksmiths deserted their anvils. Cobblers left their shoes unsoiled. The witchcraft trials were too exciting to miss. Some of the accused witches were men, but most were women. All prisoners looked weary. Some were very sick. The jails were dirty and crowded. Many of the prisoners had been locked up for weeks. The accused were brought before the judges one by one. When the prisoner declared her innocence, the girls were called in. They were the star witnesses. Testifying against witches had become a kind of job for them. And they had become very good at it. The accused person was a witch, they declared again and again. Even now, the prisoners' specters were attacking them. The girls showed that they were happening in many ways. They turned pale and then flushed. Their arms and legs stiffened and they suddenly relaxed. They described the specter so clearly that the few onlookers insisted they saw it too. At Sarah Good's trial, one of the girls fell into a fit. She choked and gasped as if she were wrestling with an invisible person. Then she seemed to faint. When she awoke, she cried out that Sarah's spectre had just tried to stab her with a knife. She was lucky enough to break off the blade. She held the blade for all to see. The crowd in the courthouse was amazed. But the young man stepped forward. The blade belonged to him, he said. He had accidentally broken his knife earlier. The girl must have picked up the broken piece from the ground. He had shown the judges his knife handle, which indeed was missing most of the blade. The blade fit it exactly. The judges were upset that the girls invented the story. Do not lie to us, they told her sternly. But they still were not suspicious. They allowed her to continue testifying. They showed no concern that if she had lied once, she might lie again. This trial and all the others were unfair. The prisoners had no good way to defend themselves, and nobody was really interested in what they had to say anyway. The judges and the jury had decided to advance that the accused witches were guilty. No one spoke about the unfair trials. The trials had become a specter sport. A lot of the spectators were in no hurry to see them end. During the long hot summer, 11 people were convicted of witchcraft and hanged. Several more died in prison while awaiting their trials. With the coming of fall, there were even more deaths as the witch hunt spread to other towns. On September 22nd, 8 condemned prisoners marched from the Salem jail up to Gallows Hill. People lined the streets, pushing and shouting. The constables escorting the prisoners warned the crowd to stay back. It was their job to protect the prisoners so that they could go safely to their deaths. The witch hunt was tearing towns apart. The Salem Village husbands was testified against wives. Wives testified against husbands. Children condemned their own parents. Lifelong friends betrayed one another. In the town of Andover, over 40 people was arrested after the Salem authorities sent 2 of the girls to identify witches. Several Andover witnesses even claimed the dog was a witch. The authorities had it cured. Poor dogs. Even besides the girls were now claiming to see specters too. For anyone with a grudge against somebody, the best way to get even was to accuse that person of a witchcraft. There was a lot of grudges in Massachusetts. At the rate things were going, the witches could soon outnumber everyone else. Altogether, there were 200 people had been arrested. The girls, the judges, and the others caught up in the witch hunt thought there would be more. But they were wrong. Public sentiment was changing. People said the witch hunt must end. There had been too many deaths. Too many respectable citizens had been condemned. Ministers were also speaking out against trials. They believed that the girls did see specters, but they were not sure they should believe what the specters said. Specters were clearly the work of the devil. Since the devil could not be trusted, why should specters be trusted either? What if the specters took the form of an innocent people to fool the girls? Spectral evidence alone, they said, should not be enough to convict a witch. It were better that 10 suspected witches should escape, said one minister, that one innocent person should be condemned. The governor listened to the minister and other advisors who thought the witch's madness had gone too far. In mid-October, further imprisonments were to be made on the charges of their witchcraft. 2 weeks later, he dismissed the witchcraft court. The Massachusetts legislature then created a higher court to try the remaining witchcraft cases. But now spectral evidence was no longer allowed. Without the girls and about the specters, only 3 persons accused of witchcraft were found guilty. The governor, however, reprieved their death sentences, and they were set free. At the end of May 1693, the governor pardoned everyone still imprisoned on witchcraft charges. It was too late for the 19 people who had been hanged and for those others who had died in prison. But for the rest, the ordeal was over at last. After the Salem witch trials ended, the Massachusetts legislature voted to pay the families of the deceased for their losses. The amount of money they were offered was small, and in any event, it was no comfort for the people of Salem Village. Money did not bring back the dead. There was no happy ending for Mr. Paris either. Once the danger was past, Tituba took back her story of being a witch. Now she said the minister had beaten her and made her confess. This angered some members of the church. They spoke out against Mr. Paris for his part in the witchcraft madness. The anger did not go away. In 1696, Paris's wife Elizabeth died. The next year he quit his post and left Salem Village forever. The girls themselves were never punished. They simply went back to their ordinary lives they had led before. In time, Betty Paris and some of the other girls got married and had families. No one asked the girls to explain their strange fits and visions, and only one girl ever offered to do this. But she was 26 years old, and she finally spoke up. In 1706, Anne Putnam stood in church to make a confession. The years since the witchcraft trials had been hard for Anne. Her parents had died, and she had raised her young brother and sister by herself. Now she apologized for the acts 14 years earlier. None of the things she had tried then were true, she told everyone. There were no witches or specters. She had not made them up on purpose, though the devil had tricked her. She begged forgiveness from God and from all those whom she had harmed. The lessons she had learned was an important one. Anne Putnam, Betty Paris, Abigail Williams, Mary Warren, and the other girls did not set out to destroy people's lives, but they started something that quickly grew too big for them to handle. Their small, guilty secret ended up causing the deaths of innocent people. They were not the only guilty ones, though. The judges, the ministers, and the neighbors who testified against each other also shared in the blame. These people were too eager to find evil where it did not exist. The Salem witch hunt was a time when fear and hate ruled over common sense. Witch Hunt. It happened in Salem Village by Stephen Krensky, illustrated by James Watling.